Chapter 2, Section 9, The Presidency, Conflicts with Congress. A natural tension exists between Congress and the President. By design, each branch of government is meant to serve as a check on the others, leading to conflicts among branches as they navigate the boundaries of their own power and their ability to limit the power of others. Judicial Nominations. The power struggle that often occurs during judicial confirmation process represents a central conflict between the executive and legislative branches. The Constitution directs the President to appoint federal judges with the advice and consent of the Senate. So when a vacancy occurs, the President nominates a candidate, and the nomination is submitted to the Senate Judiciary Committee for review. Usually, the committee will gather information and eventually hold a confirmation hearing to discuss the candidate's qualifications and judicial philosophy. However, the hearing itself is not explicitly required by the Constitution, and a nomination can stall in committee when it is not supported by the majority party, just as proposed legislation often does. In the past, nominations that made it out of committee could also be filibustered. But due to recent rule changes, judicial nominations are no longer subject to the 3/5 cloture requirement and can be approved by a simple majority of the full Senate. Arguably, the power to appoint judges is the President's most significant opportunity to build a lasting legacy. Because federal judges are appointed for life, a judicial nominee has the potential to shape federal law and policy well beyond the term of the nominating president. As a result, the Senate tends to regard its role in the process as a significant check on the president's power. Though nominees are typically confirmed when the president and the Senate Majority Leader belong to the same party, the committee hearing procedure allows members of the minority party to raise concerns about the candidate that can sometimes make it politically inconvenient for the majority party to approve the president's nomination, at which point the president may withdraw the nomination. When the presidency and the Senate are controlled by different parties, the Senate can completely block a president's nomination. Though this outcome is rare, in most cases, the president has consulted with Senate majority leaders prior to submitting the nomination in order to choose a nominee that the other party would actually confirm. Executive branch nominations. The President is also constitutionally required to seek the advice and consent of the Senate when choosing ambassadors, ministers, consuls, and other public officials. In total, around 1,200 federal executive positions are filled using the nomination and confirmation process, including cabinet secretaries and agency directors. However, unlike judgeships, these positions are not lifetime appointments. An executive branch nominee, if confirmed, serves at the pleasure of the president and can be removed from office at any time. When a new president is elected, he or she usually dismisses many of these officials and nominates new candidates to fill their posts, especially if the previous president was a member of a different party. Executive branch nominations are referred to the Senate committee with appropriate jurisdiction. For example, nominations for Secretary of State are submitted to the Foreign Relations Committee, and the committee gathers information about the nominee and holds a confirmation hearing. The confirmation process for executive branch nominations can be contentious, but since these posts are not lifetime appointments, the stakes are lower than for judicial nominees. As with legislation, nominations are sometimes stalled in committee. But historically, it has been rare for an executive branch nominee to be rejected in an up or down floor vote. Moreover, similar to judicial nominations, executive branch nominations can no longer be filibustered. Recess appointments. In order to avoid extended vacancies when Congress is not in session, Article 2 authorizes the President to make recess appointments without the express consent of the Senate. Unless subsequently approved by the Senate, a recess appointment expires at the end of the next legislative session. Historically, recess appointments were fairly common and considered non-controversial, as Congress was in session for only a few months each year, and the President needed to be able to fill vacancies as they arose in order to keep the government operating smoothly. In modern times, however, Congress is in session for most of the year, significantly reducing the amount of time that a position might stay vacant during a recess. Sometimes presidents have been accused of purposely waiting for a brief recess in order to make an appointment because they anticipated a protracted confirmation fight. In order to curb the frequency of recess appointments, the Senate has taken to calling pro forma sessions when it would otherwise be in recess. These pro forma sessions are merely procedural devices used to avoid calling a recess. The Senate does not actually conduct any business during a pro forma session. President Barack Obama challenged the use of pro forma sessions to prevent recess appointments, but the Supreme Court upheld the practice in NLRB v. Noel Canning, 2014. In theory, Article 2 allows the president to circumvent pro forma sessions and order Congress into recess if the House and the Senate are in disagreement over when to adjourn. This outcome would be especially likely to occur if one house were controlled by the president's political party and the others were not. However, no president has ever exercised this constitutional power. Policy disputes. Conflicts between the executive and legislative branches can also arise over policy matters. These disputes are more likely to occur when the White House and at least one house of Congress are controlled by different parties. In such situations, it can be difficult for legislation supported by the president to move through the legislative process, because the party controlling the committee system can stall such legislation indefinitely. Similarly, legislation that passes Congress without bipartisan support may be vetoed by the president. However, there are incentives for the president and Congress to work together to resolve policy disputes.